Hi, I'm Rich Bendis. I'm President and CEO of BioHealth Innovation, located in Rockville, Maryland, and we're an innovation intermediary. And what does that mean? Basically, we try to help biohealth companies at different stages of their development grow their businesses in the United States. And then we also have a program we call International Soft Landing, where global companies that are generally early stage who would like to enter the US market, but do not have a lot of experience, don't have a lot of connections, don't have partners identified, and would like to come to the biggest market in the world, which is the United States, for the biohealth industry. And how do they get connected? How can they establish partnerships? How can they grow their businesses and also control their expenses without having to spend a lot of money in entering the US market? So BioHealth Innovation has had about 8 years experience with that. And we have 5 great panelists with us today. And I want to mention, by the way, that we're proud to be a sponsor of this RESI conference, because in this difficult time we're going through, RESI is one of those organizations that's creating connecting opportunities for us around the world and in the United States and our own market, so we can stay connected and continue to progress with our vision and mission of our individual businesses. So thank you, RESI. And now that I've introduced myself, what I'd like to do is introduce the panelists. They'll each give a brief description of themselves as well as their company and what it does, and also the interrelationship they have, if there is one, between the other panelists on this panel. And we have a very global panel that's representing Norway, Sweden, and the Netherlands today. And we find that European companies find it very easy to enter the US market on the East Coast, just because it's easier to locate there than to go all the way out to California on the left coast, because the right coast is better for Europeans to come and enter. So anyway, let's start, and we'll look at going from most mature relationships to the most to the earlier relationships. I'll start with Paul Balto. Paul is the co-founder and CEO of Panelists in the Netherlands. Paul, welcome to the panel.
Thank you very much, Rich. Happy to join.
And a little brief introduction of yourself and your company, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Rich said, right, I am Paul Balto, CEO of Panelists, which I co-founded as well back in 2013. And Panelists is active in the organ-on-a-chip space. Organ-on-a-chip is quite a fancy field in which we try to raise cell culture to another level, right? We can culture cells in the laboratory for almost a century now, but we want to get as close as possible to what's actually going on in the human body. And that's the ambition level that's in the word organ on a chip. But there's also a technology in that same word, which is the chip. And in this case, it's not a electronic chip, but it's a microfluidic chip. So we use the similar type of techniques to create microfluidic channels, and in those channels, we grow cells in such a way that they resemble specific parts of the human body. So in the end, we can use those organs on a chip to test new medicines and develop new medicines. Well, Panelists has developed in the 7 years of our existence into the global market leader now. We work with the top 50 global pharmaceutical companies worldwide. And of course, a major step in our history was actually landing in the US, which we probably discuss later in this panel.
Thank you for the introduction, Paul. And just for the audience, how many people do you have in your organization now?
We have about 110, 112 people right now in the Panelists.
Very good. Congratulations on your growth. And then when you decided you wanted to come to the US and identified BHI as a potential partner, you needed someone to help set up the operation there. And that's where Anthony Sala came in. And so, Anthony, why don't you introduce yourself briefly? And we're going to get more into the interaction between the two of you later. But you have had a nice history with Panelists in addition to your other careers that you've had.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rich. My background, I was a scientist at NIH before coming to work with Memetis and BioHealth Innovation. I knew I was interested in entrepreneurship, but didn't have a lot of commercial experience. And it just happened that my background as a scientist was very in line, designing drug screening models with the work that Paul and Memetis was doing. And Rich introduced the two of us, helped us get our work together, and with partnership with BHI, I was able to work part-time for BHI and part-time for Memetis, getting the company set up. We won some research grants. Eventually, I became full-time with Memetis. We set up a fully functioning affiliate of the company. We have 7 people, including a sales and business development department, a fully functioning research lab. We've developed 2 products there. And, we work hand in glove with the Netherlands, and it was a great opportunity for me, experience for me as an initial entrepreneur, working with the support of a larger company and experienced entrepreneur like Paul and the BHI, portfolio supporting us as well.
Thanks, Anthony. And we'll talk a little bit about the structure that is unique that enabled a European company to access American funds, which otherwise any international company to America, if you don't have the appropriate structure, you cannot do. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Next, Alvin Martin is an entrepreneur in residence with BioHealth Innovation, who also had numerous global relationships. And Alvin, introduce yourself, please, and then also just a brief introduction on how you came in contact with Gentian in Norway.
Sure. Thank you, Rich. Nice to meet everyone. As Rich said, I'm entrepreneur in residence and supporting both Johns Hopkins University and also DC Children's Hospital. Prior to that, my own background, as many of the EIRs at BHI bring to the BHI model, is 25 plus years. I initially started with the startup of a company called Digene Diagnostics, literally out of the university, that's now part of QIAGEN. Then went on with a decade at a very small company called Life Technologies, and held and was instrumental in driving our Asia Pacific expansion while I was there. That, of course, now is part of Thermo Fisher. And then subsequently another decade at Compugen in the big data space, which is now a public company. And then most recently, I was COO at a oncology company and took the asset to phase 2, which was then diversified. So the relationship with Gentian emerged from, as Rich mentioned, my relationship with Julia Elbert. While I was at Hopkins, we had a joint venture that was privately funded. She was CEO of the prior company. And we had and so I was part of that team wearing the Hopkins hat, and we were conducting a lot of the translational research to support her company in productizing and translating. And so when Julia made the transition, we reconnected, and very much like the story that Paul just shared, Gentian's a smaller company, and it has its first IVD approved diagnostic product, but in general it's developing a wide range of tests that are compatible for clinical chemistry analyzers. And so the company actually sort of seeded itself in Europe, is now public and in Europe. And Julia had the foresight and felt it was very important to begin to have a direct presence in the US. But again, given the limited resources and the diversification of needs, which was strategic, operational, human resource, it was impossible for her to consider doing this alone. So BHI presented a real turnkey model. And after meeting Rich and the team, that's where we were. And so one of the things we did through that was helping to get Sunil on board. And actually, it was a nice story because Sunil was graduating from Hopkins with his master's. And so it was great to, be able to, we did a full independent search, but ultimately Sunil assumed the role as the first full-time employee for Gentian.
So thank you very much, Alvin. You got a nice brief intro, Sunil. By
Sure,
Alvin.
thanks.
Yeah. So,
thanks, Rich, and thanks, Alvin.
Yeah, so
My name
give everybody a little bit about your background, please.
Sure. My name is Shanil Vikramasinghe. I currently serve as Gentian's U.S. product specialist, and I'm responsible for basically developing some brand equity in the U.S. and, of course, ensuring some sales growth. I, like Alvin said, just graduated with my master's in healthcare management from Hopkins. And before Hopkins, I worked as a quality engineer, mainly in pharmaceutical and nutraceutical spaces to ensure product compliance with FDA regulations. The company I work for, Gentian Diagnostics, develops and manufactures platform-agnostic IVD kits, both for the human and veterinary healthcare spaces. And we specialize in creating particle-enhanced stoichiometric immunoassays, which use avian antibodies to quantify molecules of interest in serum and or plasma. The company is headquartered in Moss, Norway, as Alvin mentioned, and that's where most of our R&D, marketing, and production takes place. But we're also supported by offices here in the United States and also Sweden and China.
Great. And you're located actually within the BioHealth Innovation offices in Rockville, Maryland for one of your U.S. offices, Shanil?
Exactly, yes. And it has been quite a ride. And as Alvin would say, it's been a very productive collaboration, and love this opportunity to speak about it.
Great, thank you. We'll learn more about your ride a little bit later in our panel discussion here. So I think that's a very good introduction. Very diverse group, companies at different stages, people with different diverse backgrounds all coming together. So I want to go back to Memetas, which is the most mature company in this panel today, and talk a little bit about the history and the decision-making process Paul Balto and Joost Moore, his partner, the other co-founder for Memetas, went through when they decided that they wanted to take their company in the Netherlands and establish a beachhead in the United States. So Paul, let's go through a little history there, and then we'll maybe talk a little bit about the governance structure we created, which was unique, and how Anthony was able to take advantage of that structure to benefit a European company in America.
Sure. Yeah, it was I would say an adventurous trip. We founded Memetas in 2013. By then, we couldn't pay ourselves, so we were still in university or earning our money elsewhere. But at the same year, we also founded Memetas Inc., which is a joint venture that we did with BHI together. At the time, we had one employee, so we were a multinational with one employee, which was, I think, quite a sportive construction. But it allowed us at the earliest days of Memetas to learn what it was to do business in the United States, to have a foothold there, to have a presence there. And a little bit later, Anthony joined us there as well, so he could really be our eyes and ears on the ground there, and really, prepare the market for Memetas products and services. So, as I said in the beginning, we set it up as a joint venture with BHI. In the meanwhile, we also have our wholly owned entity there, so it's two entities right now. But really both under the Memetas brand.
And so when you created that new U.S. entity, one of the things that we wanted to do is find a way, create a way for your company to access some of the U.S. funding that would benefit you if you're going to establish employees and a location in America. And in order to do that, what we identified is that most companies coming into America, or any company who wants to take advantage, for example, the United States Small Business Innovation Research Program, SBIR, or take advantage of funding in Maryland or other states, or biotechnology tax credits, would have to be owned and controlled 51% by Americans. And so when you were looking to establish this United States entity, that was something that was very interesting and also troubling at the beginning, saying, do we really want to have 51% control by someone in America where the Dutch are very controlling themselves, correct, Paul? And how do we let go of some of that control in order to take advantage of the benefits of being 51% owned by Americans? And, you know, when we went through this creation of this Memetis U.S. subsidiary, it wasn't like it was done in 30 days. I think it almost took us almost a full year before we could get to an agreement on what the structure would be. Is that correct, Paul?
Well, I would estimate it half a year, but indeed we discussed a lot.
Right.
I have to say we also had to do all the contract work ourselves, right? We didn't have the legal something like that. But yeah, you know, it was part of the idea back in those days. Funding was everything. I mean, funding is always everything for a startup, but particularly in those early days. So the non-dilutive funding that could come with American programs was interesting, and the construction that we did for US Inc., where BHI was also a major shareholder together with Memetas in the Netherlands, was a fantastic construction. I have to say that it stays fantastic till today, right? Not necessarily for the non-dilutive aspect of it, but because it's actually a way to work for the American government, right? Right now we work for the National Cancer Institute. We work for the NCATS, Translational Research Institute from NIH. And that's really, you know, allows you to have joint programs with top universities in the United States, having funding for joint research works, and also being able to cater to the American government with innovative products that our organ-on-chip products are. You know, really allows us to be part of the innovation ecosystem of the United States. So I think it was more than just the funding alone. It was really being part of that U.S. innovation ecosystem that we helped, that we kickstarted back in 2013. And I would say, you know, I probably wouldn't have done it if it were not for the great trust and personal relationship that I had with you, Rich. Because it's all down to people in the end, and you know, it's a long distance, right? The Atlantic Ocean is a long distance, and 6-hour time difference is not easy to work with. So you really need to work with somebody that you trust and that you have high esteem of, and Rich was that person. And directly in the slipstream came Anthony, who really set it up thoroughly in the years after that.
Well, thank you for those platitudes, Paul. But it really, as you know, it takes a team, and we have a great team. And I'm going to belabor the Memetis relationship very briefly, a little bit more, because it sets the stage for other discussions. And one of the other things that's important to a company is to protect their intellectual property. So when you decided to set up a U.S. subsidiary, it was important that Memetis could control their IP in the Netherlands without having to transfer all of that over to the United States, especially when you had a new partner that you were going to share your equity in that U.S. subsidiary. So I think we talked about cross-licensing agreements back and forth between the two companies, which was a unique structure, but you might just briefly talk about how that enabled you to control your intellectual property and your assets there, but also take advantage of the U.S. market.
Yeah, of course, there's a reason of why the U.S. government asks for a strong U.S. ownership in the type of companies that they sponsor. And the reason is also that there's really real commercial activity being developed there. And it also means that if you set up a structure like we did, the joint venture structure construction, then that joint venture should have a business in its own right. And we could do that, right, by basically isolating part of the business that we thought was really fit for the type of programs we did for the U.S. government, while at the same time safeguarding our own business that we developed already. So basically, it comes down to a classical foreground, background IP, and indeed a cross-licensing construction that came with it, so that the U.S. entity could basically independently execute its programs, while at the same time making use of the technology from the mothership in the Netherlands. And that's how we did it, right? And that's also a reason why right now we have also a second entity which is wholly owned, so that we can also develop products and R&D efforts and commercial activities that are wholly owned. So we have now both, and that works fantastic right now, up till today.
Right. Thank you, Paul. That's a good introduction. And I know there's a lot of nuances and very specific details which we can't go into in a very short panel discussion, but I'm sure for anybody that has an interest to learn more, we'll be glad to share that information with people later. But one of the critical things in developing this partnership beyond me was having somebody like Anthony Sala, who really was a bench scientist, very well established in the United States, understood science, research, and also wanted to get more into the commercial world and entrepreneurship by leaving NCI, coming to BHI. So Anthony, talk a little bit about your introduction to Paul, Memetis, your desire to learn through this experience, but also the benefit it brought to them with your knowledge that you had in the United States.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rich. Just to give a little history on the relationship, I was a scientist at NCI. As Rich meant, I was networked through to BHI through our tech transfer office, and I was an inventor at NCI as well and had a number of technologies. I think it was on Paul's first trip to the United States. They came to NIH and we met. We talked about our backgrounds. I think we really connected. I saw the value in technology he was developing. I think he saw the alignment with my background. And a couple of years later, when I was ready to leave NIH, and I wanted to get into entrepreneurship, I had some ideas for my own company. Rich introduced us again to Paul, and I started working with them. We were able to, take some of the concepts in the construction that Rich and Paul had made and start applying for non-dilutive funding, identifying academic partners, and I really was the boots on the ground. They had built an early strategy. I came in, I refined that. We were able to win about $5 million in grants developing drug screening products that look at, rare undermet indications like African American prostate cancer, and also products that predict, safety problems with xenobiotics and compounds in the liver that is unmet right now, both to the government and to large pharmaceutical companies. And in the process of growing our network on the research side, I was also able to connect the company with a number of U.S. partners, U.S. pharmaceutical companies. We go to conferences together. We'd meet with companies around the country, and I think we established a beachhead of a few $1 million in services in the U.S. and in the Netherlands through those interactions. So it was a great experience for me coming out of the lab, learning how to build products, seek funding, dilutive and non-dilutive, and build relationships with customers.
So I think what I want to add to that story, Anthony, is that you of course also hired some fantastic people that are working for us still today, right? Because it's all about people, business, in my view. So and you managed to identify those people and make them enthusiastic for the company. And what I also still think is a great contribution is that you set up our first laboratory, right? And it was in the basement. So, looking from the Netherlands to the US, you always think like, okay, if you have a real startup company, you have to start in the basement. But there were no basements here around in the Netherlands to start my company. But luckily, Anthony found one in Gaithersburg, and that's where we started in the US. So that was great as well.
Yeah, we were lean and mean, and controlled costs, and yeah, we sublet space in the basement of another pharmaceutical company, which is a fun experience.
Yeah. That's done in a typical Dutch way, to be as frugal as possible. Is that right, Paul?
You mean as cost efficient as possible?
Yeah, and sometimes people call it cheap, but that's okay. You guys do pretty well. So, but Anthony, very quickly, the $5 million you won in non-dilutive funding from Memetis US has gone in to develop product extensions to the pipeline that Memetis was developing in the Netherlands. And then also there was that unique license agreement, anything developed by the US entity would have this exclusive license back to the parent in the Netherlands. So it was a very symbiotic relationship where there was a benefit of the research going on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean that would benefit both organizations as well as the parent company, correct?
Yeah, exactly. You know, there was an interest from the government in the first contract we got for a stem cell-based liver on a chip that could predict toxicity. We developed that. That's right now being used to screen hundreds of thousands of compounds by NCATs, and also I believe Genentech is currently using that same extension as well to predict toxicity of some of their compounds.
Great, thank you. I'm going to migrate a little bit to a little different style of a relationship, one that we've had. Alvin, how long have we been with Gentian now? A little bit over a year?
Yep, that's right.
And the difference with this relationship is it isn't a full-blown subsidiary operation like we do with Memetis. This was one where they wanted to enter the U.S., still evaluating whether or not, you know, creative structures of U.S. subsidiaries make sense down the road, but they're very early in this U.S. introduction, so it's more of a business development relationship that we are offering for them to be able to interact with the whole BHI team, have an office to come to, not just a WeWork space or an incubator where you don't know anybody, build, you know, some personality. So Alvin, talk a little bit about how that evolution evolved and where it stands today.
Sure. Yeah, so I think as Rich said, there was a real eye towards being able to, I'll use the terminology, have headquarters continue to think globally, but have the ability to act locally and be responsive to the very specific needs, reimbursement environment, and really branding and presence of Gentian in the U.S. Now, Gentian had, as a public company, had already a virtual subsidiary. So, as Rich said, there wasn't a need to legally set up a new entity, but for all practical purposes, the BHI location is in fact the operating headquarters currently for Gentian. And I think, as I alluded to earlier, you know, Hilia, with her extensive experience, clearly understood that, you know, hiring someone like Chenille and having the person sitting by themselves either at home or in isolation was probably going to be not really good for the individual, and Chenille in this case, but also didn't kind of allow this spoke and hub model where Gentian was still discovering what the market needed. There was some and as part of that, there was a real need to be able to leverage the networks that existed both with BHI, myself in this case, where we're really helping and supporting Chenille in interacting with KOLs and getting really input on the best positioning for the market. And then, of course, the operational, which you mentioned. This literally was turnkey, and we were able to, you know, once we had Chenille in place, he was able to get up and running the day after he was hired. So I think part of this was the shared vision by the CEO and understanding that this success in a new geography really requires almost a critical mass, but they didn't have the funding, nor or was it too premature to make that kind of investment. So effectively, that's, you know, what the BHI model has offered here, which is really critical mass without having to hire all these functions on the first.
Right, it controls the overhead. But the other thing that we failed to mention is Anthony has made several trips to the Netherlands to see the Memetis operation over there. Alvin's made trips to Norway to see the Gentian operation. So it's just not one-sided. You have to understand what's going on in the headquarters of the other operations in the other parts of the world before you can totally be effective in supporting them from an American perspective. And Chenille has made trips to Norway himself. So based on what Alvin's saying, Chenille, talk a little bit about what was important for Gentian to get started in America, sort of the steps you went through. How long has it taken? Because I know when I see you in the office, sometimes he comes in very early because he has to be somewhat on European time, leaves a little earlier because of the European time difference there. So he's very flexible with that. But, you know, just getting started to build a brand, a new name, a new person in a new market. So talk a little bit about that experience, Shanil.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it was a very eye-opening experience for me because in school, you know, you never really understand or never really experience anything like this, even in the theoretical sense. And so part of starting out was really developing a strategic plan for Gentian and understanding the competitive landscape for our products and really putting it in context of the healthcare system in the US. And, you know, the analysts at BHI and Alvin really instrumental in helping me understand not only, you know, what the demand for the product was, but also how it fits in terms of reimbursement models that were available for that product. And so when I first started out, I believe it was the first month, we worked on the strategy, overall strategy, and I eventually took that to Norway on my first visit, presented it to Hilja, and got their input on it. And yeah, it's been a long and arduous process, but right now at this moment we're kind of building our network with KOLs within the nephrology space for our main 510K approved product. And so Alvin has been helping me kind of roll out, you know, our strategy and fine tune next steps in our action plan for the US.
And how has the Rockville geographical location been for you to interact in the US, Shanil?
Well, yeah, it has been, you know, an amazing location, especially when you consider, you know, how close you are to world-renowned hospitals, which is important for us, and also its proximity to the NIH and having the potential to hopefully seek some non-dilutive funding in the future for our initiatives. And there's also something to be said about, you know, the work environment that BHI has provided me, because Alvin said working and being the only US representative for a company is an isolating experience. And so the camaraderie that I've built with the BHI staff and mainly the analysts has been a real blessing for me because it makes my job a lot more enjoyable.
Great, thank you, Shanil. Now let's go to the other end of the spectrum. Martin Olvesen with Ondosis, who basically we met during a Resi event. It was the Paris event, I think, Martin, that was supposed to be in person, which was really one of their first virtual experiences. And Andrea Alms on the BHI team, who's going to be fund manager for the BioHealth Capital Venture Fund that we're raising, met Martin through just a virtual meeting, and then we had some subsequent follow-up. But it also shows the benefit of this Resi virtual environment we're in right now, where we're meeting people to develop long-term relationships, we hope, in the future. So Resi, thank you very much. Martin, it was great to meet you. And then what we've learned is Martin was a spin-out, and he'll talk a little bit more, of AstraZeneca. And of course, AstraZeneca MedImmune was one of the founders of BioHealth Innovation 8 years ago in the Montgomery County, Maryland area. And Martin has spent several years with AstraZeneca. So it seems like there was just a natural fit for us to talk. So Martin, talk a little bit about that experience, what you're looking for to gain in potentially coming to America, and sort of how you've progressed with your company to date.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, pleased to do so. And as you say, sometimes the apple doesn't fall too far away from the tree. We are a spin-out from AstraZeneca, as you mentioned. And what we do is basically a handheld device that delivers oral solid medicines, right? So we are a therapeutic, but we are a medical device. And for that, you need to select yourself a target market and then the disease. And for us in our technology, the disease of ADHD, which is primarily where the leadership in terms of thinking, guidelines, and where the market is the most advanced is in the US. So for us as a company, even if we are sprung out of Sweden, our first launch will happen in the US in 2022. And all the advice we get now from a scientific point of view is from key opinion leaders situated in great universities in the US. And the first regulatory authority we have conversations around in how to get this new technology approved and reaching patients is the FDA in the US. So for us, as a very small company, trying to find a clever way, an efficient way, hopefully not cheap, but efficient way of entering into the US is critical. Our customers are there, the thought leaders are there, the regulatory authorities that is going to kind of give us thumbs up or thumbs down on our technology is there. So we've been going on now since 2017, and we are really feeling the urgency to take that step over and to build relations and networks and live conversations with experts and networks in the US. So that's our thinking. And we met in this RESI digital conference just a few months back, and we've been thinking already around, okay, so what does it take to put yourself in Boston? You need to employ someone, you need to have a lease. Are you going to have a flat there? What about permits and so on? It's not tough to get into the US, I think, but it's still a heavy lift for a small company. And it takes focus and attention. So when we started a conversation around a soft landing opportunity, which potentially would enable from the beginning administration, setup, a network of peers, a workplace, an ability to recruit the right people, and basically build a base platform for us to start engaging with the market. That was a very attractive offer, and that's why we're engaging in this conversation with you, Rich, and the team around how potentially Ondosis could be one of your next incumbents in the organization.
Yeah, we're excited about that, Martin. We think it's a natural. The other thing is also having the synergy of sort of an AstraZeneca in our backyard with 4,000 to 5,000 people, and a number of you that makes the landing in America a little different than going into a foreign market where you have nobody that you can relate to at all. So we're anxious to see if we can connect some of those relationships. We're early in our discussions, but hopefully this is something that we can evolve and mature in one of the variations of what we've done with either Gentian or Memetas. So we're excited about that. And one of the things I'd like also, we were talking about non-dilutive funding that Anthony helped raise, and Gentian's going to try to approach in the future. But Paul also has gone through a Series A venture capital financing in the Netherlands. And Paul, talk a little bit about how the investors in your company, talk a little bit about your financing strategy and how they viewed having an established beachhead in America as you were out raising money for your Dutch headquarters.
Yeah, so I think they have always been very supportive. We did 2 rounds. We did a Series A round, I think something like $6 million back in 2014, and then $20 million round in 2018. And I think the most interesting one to talk about is the one in 2018, right? So there we really wanted to go beyond the Dutch ecosystem of VCs. So we were really raising funds globally, basically, including Asia and the United States. And I think our presence in the United States definitely has served us to broaden our network for investors in the US. Anthony himself has been reaching out. Some of our early business developers have been reaching out to some investors. And then you see that let's say that in Europe investors might be a little bit more conservative than American investors, but once you get that traction in the US, then suddenly things start also moving here in Europe. So I think the site in the US helped us to be in the US, to breathe US style innovation and action, and that helped us again to get traction with investors in the US, and that created a whole cascade also towards Europe and even towards Asia. So I really think it has been part of that magic mix that in the end all comes together, and make sure that you do the round. So that's was absolutely a big help.
And when you mention Asia, I think you've got an operation in Japan now, right, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have investors also from Singapore, from Taiwan, but our operations are in Japan. I would say, roughly at the same time when we started in the US, we also started doing business in Japan. At the time, we thought, we were a little bit of an underdog in the space of organ on a chip. So we thought, well, in Japan, we can basically gain market share on the radar. In the end, we did, but the Japanese market developed a little bit slower than the American market. So the American market developed way quicker. The period from first discussion to a deal in the US is maybe about half a year, and in Japan that can be easily 2 years. So yeah, we learned that as well.
Yeah, thank you. And then the other thing Anthony might talk a little bit about was the shared lab experience, because Anthony, in addition to Memetis, was starting up his own startup, and you might just briefly talk about Miracule and then talk about how you were able to potentially share resources in the beginning, Anthony.
Yeah. So when we first started out the company, I just had a desk at BHI on the second floor when we were in the old hardware building. After we won our first award in 2016, about 6 months after I joined, we initially set up a lab, subletting 300 square feet in the basement from another company. It allowed us to start doing that research in partnership with University of Pittsburgh as well, a KOL in the space. Then the following year, I also secured funding for our second company, Miracule, which we spun out of the government, and then we started renting our own space. And we were able to leverage both companies. I ran both companies. It was great to be in the same office. I couldn't have done that. And it also made us affordable. We now had a 3,000 square foot lab space in a brand new building, which we wouldn't have been able to afford if we weren't leveraging both companies, sharing that space, sharing those assets, internal operations, et cetera.
And then today, where are both companies related to lab space?
Yeah, so we still share space, which is great, and we're at a brand new building on 704 Quince Orchard that's in partnership with Alexandria, who we were introduced to through BHI. They're one of the biggest life science incubators, and they really built a fantastic building. It's really, really fantastic that we're there. They're great labs, state of the art, and we're doing state of the art research there, both on our novel RNA therapeutics at Miracule and our novel organ on chip products. They're putting in a full automation suite for Memetis, so now we can build automated without human hands organ on chip and hopefully send them to customers. So it's really a cutting edge facility.
And one of the other benefits of that space that's an Alexandria space is Alexandria Real Estate is on the BHI board. Joe Marcus, the founder. They have over 30 million square feet of wet lab space in the United States in the top 7 BioHealth markets, but they also have a major venture capital division, and they are an investor in Anthony's Miracule company. And when Paul gets ready for phase 3 or series C or whatever, they might be a candidate for an investment in the Memetis at the same time. So that's another benefit of this interaction between all of these different organizations, laboratory facilities, and investors, as well as the non-dilutive and dilutive funding sort of coming together nicely over time. So I'm going to open it up a little bit. Do any of the panelists have any comments or questions related to the other companies that are on the panel with us together now? I mean, Martin, did you have any other questions that have been stimulated through this process, or Paul or Chanel, that you'd like to bring up between one another?
I'll bring one up. Since you didn't call on me, but I'll bring it up. It was a comment that Martin made about the regulatory sort of importance of being able to run that and with a presence. While different indication, we're actually going through, and Chanel alluded to it, a very similar process for the second product to be FDA approved for Gentian. And, you know, I would say that the difference in perspective that we've been able to bring is that we're really, we're guiding the process to intersect between three factors: the unmet need, which means that we're having our colleagues in Norway on the phone, speaking to KOLs, this is the ID space, to be very clear on where's the unmet need so we can get the reimbursement after it's been approved, and not thinking just from the standpoint of what's our fastest route. And then, of course, providing the expertise and guidance on the actual tactics of how they should submit their application. So I thought it was important to highlight, because we're finding some real convergence in what we've identified as the unmet need and reimbursable spaces versus, you know, the view that existed from a European point of view. So I just wanted to highlight that. And we've leveraged our relationship in one case with DC Children's, who also are on our board, of course, Rich. And that's the type of access that becomes very easy for, you know, Gentian and Chenille versus, you know, just trying to do this de novo.
But also, when you talk a regulatory environment, we talked about NIH. Of course, they've got 6,000 scientists, 27 research institutes located right in Montgomery County, Maryland. But the FDA, with the whole regulatory environment, is located down the street, also in Montgomery County, Maryland. So it's nice to have both of those major bodies there. And you can see the benefit of what's going on, especially with COVID-19, and how the FDA is going through some accelerated approval processes with the FDA, and it's nice to see that right in our backyard. And to be honest with you, and I'm a little prejudiced, the BioHealth Capital Region, Maryland, DC, and Virginia, has become really one of the epicenters for diagnostics, for vaccines, for therapeutics that's going on, whether it's the regulatory environment, the companies who are doing the research, or the testing around COVID-19. And we have 32 companies involved in the research, development, or the testing around the pandemic right in our backyard in the BioHealth Capital Region. And then it's hard to turn on TV without seeing Anthony Fauci, the head of NIAID, on TV every day, or Deborah Birx from the NIH talking about what's going on. So it's sort of nice to see that what a contribution our region is making in trying to address this global pandemic that's going on. And, you know, you sort of feel good about that. You know that a lot of these people in our own backyard are having a major impact on hopefully bringing this to its knees in the future. Any other observations or comments or questions amongst the panelists that you'd like to have, because we're getting close to closing pretty soon?
So one comment there, building on what you said, Rich, around new practice and COVID, and what we know is that that has pushed digital therapeutics heavily, and that the US has really taken a step forward in utilizing digital in terms of delivery of care. That's also something which makes it extremely important for us to come over and start working with the leading companies. Technology is so intertwined, and also on the payer side, as you said, Alvin, around what gets reimbursed and what gets kind of paid for. You can also see that the evolution in the US right now on really paying for digital interventions in a different way than what you would see in Europe. So that's other areas, kind of environmental factors, that really makes a big difference in terms of us coming over.
Yeah, I think that we didn't mention CMS, but CMS is located in Baltimore, Maryland, and which really does all of Medicare, Medicaid pricing for all of the drugs, devices. And then, of course, you have the regulatory environment for the FDA, where digital is sort of evolving, and they still haven't figured out everything related to digital. But I think, as you said, Martin, I think this pandemic is making them look at some accelerated decisions that they have to go through because of the positive implications digital can have in trying to create better healthcare for the patient. So we are coming close to the close now, and what I'd like to do is to have each panelist have a chance to do a little closing comment that they would like to have related to either their company, their or the panel discussion we've had. And then at the end, please give your email address, which I know none of you have had much email through this whole pandemic. I know, just like everybody else, I'm sure it's doubled because everybody has more time on their hands to communicate with one another. But Paul, I'm going to let you close first. Thank you for being on the panel. Any closing comments you have, and then please let people know how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rich. Thanks for inviting me for this panel. I can just summarize again that, you know, landing in the BioHealth Innovation region of Maryland was a great step in our development, and it's up till today, right? It's not just the lean startup that did it, but still, you know, the market leader now in the organ chip space is still very happy. And you mentioned all the institutes that are around you, but also, let's say, the pharma around Philadelphia is not too far away, you know. Of course, Boston is an important place to be, and we need to have our sales reps there. But for reaching out, you know, for a base, for really developing an organization, the Maryland region is absolutely fantastic. And anything else is that for, you know, newcomers to the BHI system, I can just recommend El Pizzico, which is an Italian restaurant just down the road, and they serve a fantastic bottle of Barolo. So you know, next time I'm there, I'm going to invite Rich once again to empty one together with me.
Very good. I look forward to that. That's one of our favorite places, Martin. It's a tradition for when they come. We have this favorite. It's I think the best Italian restaurant in our region, but they also have some very good wine selections.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. My email address is like my name, p.vulto, V-U-L-T-O, Atil, and then Memetas, like the company name, .com.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for being on the panel. Anthony, closing comments?
Yeah, no, thank you again, Rich, for having me here and the opportunity to work with Memetas. From the U.S. side, I think it's great to bring companies into the region, and the experience you get working for an international company, you know, not only supporting them building a beachhead in America, but enriching our region and bringing more influences in and changing the culture of our region to reflect some of the advantages of cultures outside of ours. It's been a fantastic experience. I think benefited both organizations. So you know, I think that this region in particular, with access to the federal government agencies, you know, U.S. regulatory agencies, and leading academic institutions like Hopkins, is just a fantastic opportunity to build and start U.S. international relationships. And
if people want to communicate with you, Anthony, your email.
Yeah, so I have many of them. I'll give my BioHealth Innovation email. So it's A, and then my last name, Sala, S-A-L-E-H, at biohealthinnovation.org.
Thank you, Anthony, for what you do for us and for the companies you work with. And Albine.
Yes, so my comment really is that our business, it takes a village. It's just hard. And so, you know, the opportunity to be able to anchor with an organization that's just so deeply networked, I think that in and of itself is of tremendous value. And so happy to, you know, as a follow-up, answer any more questions. And my email is amartin@biohealthinnovation.org.
Shanil, thank you, Albine.
Yeah, thanks, Rich, for having me and putting this panel together. In closing, I guess, you know, it's really clear from the conversation we had that it's incumbent on companies that are coming to the U.S. to kind of find a partner that can help them navigate the kind of nebulous U.S. healthcare sector. And I think the BHI soft landing program provides an excellent opportunity to create such a partnership. And so I know myself, my colleagues in Norway are very, very grateful to BHI for the opportunity they've provided and the help that they've provided over the last 10 months. And I'd love to connect with and help anyone that's considering this opportunity. I can be reached through my Gentian email. It's just my first name at gentian.com.
Thank you, Shanil. Look forward to seeing you, and we can get back together again in Rockville sometime.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Martin, thank you for joining the panel. Closing comments.
I mean, the potential to get into the US faster than what we would be able to do otherwise. It's probably my conclusion. It's been inspiring to hear about the journeys you've been taking, all you guys around this call. We would not be able to do it on ourselves as quickly and as immature as we are if we were not going to embrace some kind of program like this. And I hear from everyone that the location is great and that you have fun as well when you're out in Italian restaurants and so on and so forth. But I think on a serious note, we need to get over to the US. Sooner is better than later, and this might enable us to do it sooner, which is then creating immediately business value for us. So I think that's my conclusion. If you want to talk to me, m.olofsson@ondosis.com is my email. So
spell Olofsson for them, Martin. I'm sorry. Can you spell Olofsson for them?
I do my best. OLOVSSON.
Great. That's easier than Chenille's last name, so that's why he only has his first one.
What a lot easier.
So thank you all. I think it's been a very educational and informative panel. And by the way, these panels are all going to be available online at the RESI conference, June 8th through 10th. And then I think also after that. And so I just want to thank all of the panelists. And if anybody wants to contact me, I'm at rbendis@biohealthinnovation.org. I want to thank RESI for giving us the opportunity to be a gold sponsor. We look forward to continued work with them in the future. And I look forward to seeing everybody when we can get back to meeting with each other in person, breaking some bread and having a glass of wine. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Rich.
Thanks, Rich.